Testing one, two. Hello, Patricia O'Connor here with Frida. With Frida Reba Darcy, and tonight we were not without our hiccups. I This is take two. Take two. We had a little issue with sound the first time, so this is Patricia O'Connor and Frida Reba Darcy on the Bonsai Balcony. Tonight we're at Frida's place. We have a wisteria that we're going to do a little stuff to. I'm going to clean the pot. I'm going to take out some clover that has decided to occupy the space this is into, and I'm going to talk about wisteria and how this stick in a pot, yeah, it is. It's the stick in a pot led to bonsai for me, for moi. Everything I got going on out there started with this stick in this pot. And it wasn't like it was started from seed or anything. This was a clone. I literally went to Etsy and ordered 6 clones, 3 purple, 3 white. I had the idea that I wanted them to come through, put them in planters, have them bust out, have them come through the pickets on the front of my rail and cascade down with beautiful flowers. I thought that would be really pretty. And the landlord early on nixed it, which I already knew that if he knew anything about wisteria, he would give me problems because those things are kind of known to tear down buildings. I was going to have to stay on top of it to make sure that my stuff never did any damage because I just kind of be conscientious like that. But anyway, he nixed it early. But at the same time, I was already starting to have other ideas. I remember a long time ago seeing some wisteria when I was on a job in uh, in rural Georgia, and wisteria was blooming all over this house that we were shooting at, and it was an old farmhouse, and we were shooting some old timey type picturesque movie. And from my vantage point up in the air in a crane where I had big movie lights called BFLs pointed at the show, I was sitting back there smelling the fragrance of this wisteria and watching those long, long blooms just cascade down. It looked like 2 or 3 feet. And I was thinking how beautiful those were. And after a while, I also began to daydream about different trees in my life with plants and stuff. I'm way up in the air until they holler for something on the radio. I don't have a lot going on. I've already got all the lights and set it and forget it mode. And now my job is to kind of be still. So I started reminiscing about when I was a kid, just almost a teenager, how I had gotten into bonsai. My first bonsai tree I found I saw bonsai for the first time at a nurseryman's convention. I've told the story before in Dallas, Texas. I think they were probably black pines or redwoods or something. They were fairly tall. They were formal uprights. I saw them from across the room and wondered if they were plastic because they looked so exactly like a tree that my first thought was, is this some new hobby of bringing, porcelain or some kind of really tasteful figurine? And so I had to go up and get a look and see that they really were real trees. I was amazed. And I think I ended up working for that guy in his booth before the show was over. And when it was done, a lot of times dealers will horse trade their wares. If they see something at another booth they would like, rather than ship it back, the company will say, and you can do as a perk whatever you need to do with your display. When we tear down the display, we want the display back, but the stuff that you have, rather than spend money to ship trees back that have been in a show for a week, you can horse trade for that stuff if you want to. So I came home with a Japanese hawthorn, and if being in a show for a week didn't kill it in Dallas, Texas, if riding in my lap for 7 hours in a 69 Dodge van didn't kill it from Dallas, Texas, then when I brought it home and set it down on a really tall central heating and cooling unit in the backyard. It's big, huge box looking things that I kind of thought made for a pretty cool pedestal. What it actually made for was a big fan that blew on the tree at all hours, day and night. And the tree was, if it wasn't already dead when I put it up there, it was dead shortly thereafter because it just like was. Pretty sure I just dried that sucker right out. But we were about to move. We were about to move to an even more rural destination, and I would spend the next summer digging up yopons and oaks and probably some poison ivy and some other sumac and some other stuff. But all the while, I would get wire and I would put shape and bends into bonsai trees, and I just had, I might have even had a few mimosas. Those were growing wild all over Texas. The little pink blossoms you would see. I've also heard them called sensitive, but so those would have been my first thing to bonsai, and then I turned 12 and 13, and then rural life led to motorcycles, and we had big motocross tracks we would make in the neighborhood. And next thing you know, I'm going to races, and next thing you know, I'm a teenager, and the next thing you know, girls, and the next thing you know, what the hell's bonsai? And years later, I would think about bonsai every once in a while after I'd gotten into motion picture and after I'd stopped racing motorcycles and after I'd done all these other things that had taken me farther and farther away from home and away from home for longer and longer periods of time. Um, in the film business, I could barely have a dog. More or less, you wouldn't be able to have some tree that you were going to move away from for, you know, 20 weeks or something. So I kind of missed bonsai. I didn't decide to stop as much as I got a little busier and got a little distracted. And if I would have had to choose between bonsai and motorcycles, I don't know what I would have chosen. But it was like motorcycles and 10 other things were dragging me out of the house. And bonsai was that thing that just got a little. Mom kept up my trees for a little while, and then some of them got given to the grandmother, and then some of them got given to the neighbors, and then some of them, you know, that was that until I got this wisteria. Literally, this wisteria. This was a clone. I went to Etsy. As I said earlier, I bought three whites and three purples. I wanted them both to just tangle up and make this mess of purple and white flowers. I thought it would be beautiful. So I made every mistake you can make. When I decided to go, I remembered once as a kid sitting in that crane way up in the air looking at those bonsai going, remember when you were young and you had bonsai trees? I wonder if one of those wisterias would have made a good bonsai tree because those blooms would have been an outrageous little, talk about a hit. If you've got something that looks all cool and bonsai like, and at the same time it makes those knockout flowers and just makes the whole house that fragrant and all that, who who wouldn't love that? And flash forward, flash forward to the landlord telling me, no, get those out of those rungs up there. That'll tear the up. And I went, I know, wisterias will pull stuff apart. I was going to watch them and make sure they didn't. And he was like, yeah, no, X-nay on the X-nay on the wisteria A, on the Wisteria way. So, hi, Paul. Hello there, Paul. Um, so it was about that time that I remembered my little flash in the pan thought from years before. I have a funny brain like that, that random thoughts will from 20 years before will absolutely pop into my head. And so I was like, well, so I went to my laptop, not this one, but one like it, and I typed in Wisteria Bonsai and started watching YouTube videos. I watched a bunch of them that night. I was very addicted to bonsai by the time I got through watching those 10 or 11 videos. So that's kind of how I got hooked. By the time I got through watching all that stuff, I was sure that I was going to just have the most beautiful wisteria bonsai in all the world. So I set out to start making all the mistakes at once. First thing I did was I bought a rather large pot. I over potted this. And this was a $12 clone. This was also 4 years ago. This is 4 years later. You think it looks like a stick now. 4 years ago, it was a much smaller stick. And I put it in this pot, which cost over $100 and was like that big. As a total amateur, I went, this is your first bonsai. You can't kill your first bonsai. You have to keep your first bonsai so that no matter what happens to any of the rest of them, you need to be able to say you kept your first bonsai. So let's overpot it and the tree will grow into the pot. Wrong, it doesn't. Also, that was $100 pot. That was a $4 clone. You don't do that. I mean, that's just, that's tacky. The saving grace was I would destroy that pot. As you can see, it's busted. I put it on a small table beside a second pot um, that were about equal weight. And then one day I picked up the second pot to do something, and when I did, that caused the table to go off balance and turn over. So that's the only bonsai pot I think I've broken in my time of doing this so far. I'm at one bonsai, and even then, I didn't throw it away in case I want to do some bonsai art with the dead pot. By the time I broke that pot, I had already learned that I had committed my first bonsai faux pas. And when I figured it out, I'm like, I don't care. It'll grow into it. Things don't grow into things that well. A lot of trees or plants or just stuff like kind of being squeezed. You put something in a small cup and it outgrows that, and then you put it in a bigger cup, and then it'll grow into that really quick. But if you went from a tiny tree to a big container, you might look at it a year later and it's a little yellow, sickly, tiny thing in a big old pot that never, you know. So that was wrong on all those reasons. But here's what I did right. The second time around, I went to a pretty common bonsai nursery and I ordered this pot. This is more fitting for oh yeah, right. You're trying to fix them. I thought this was a more fitting pot. One, I like this. I was looking for a round, cream colored white pot, and I found this one. However, this is not a nice. This is not a nice pot. This is a very cheap pot. I don't know how well it reads, but there's a seam right here where somebody stuffed some clay into a latex mold. And with a wheel, like they had, like if they had a wheel and they'd have dipped their fingers in a little bit of water, if they'd have spun this pot just a little and dragged their fingers across it, they could have totally taken that mold mark out. But this was made from someplace that makes mass quantities of cheap bonsai pots, and this was like, you know, a $4 bonsai pot. And for a $4 bonsai pot, I guess you don't get that minute that it would take to make the marks go away. So in that way, it was at least more fitting that I wasn't totally overpotting this wisteria. Um, Also, this was a little bit more of an appropriate size. This is a little bit more of an appropriate size for the tree. I'm going to pick up all of this. We have quite a bit now. When it comes to wisterias, this guy, excuse me, This guy is about to bloom. This little purple thing here and this little purple thing here will be two rather long cascading blooms, and they're going to be really hard white. And this is all of our foliage. So at the end of the season, at the end of the summer, this thing will flush out with a whole bunch of new buds. And some of those buds are going to be next year's sprouts, and some of those buds are going to be next year's blooms. If you have any intention of pruning your tree back, but you want to see the blooms, go to YouTube, load up on the videos. I never really paid attention to which ones look like blooms and which one look like sprouts, but it would be really easy if you weren't careful and you go cutting on this thing next fall to cut it back. It would be really easy to cut all your blooms off and not realize it, if that matters to you. Also, wisterias will make these little felt looking pouches, like like what you would see green beans make, these strips with big beans in them, except they're fuzzy and they're felt like. And a lot of times on a big vine, they might be this big. And if you split them open, you'll see some large, what in the US they call kidney beans, some large beans like that. Easy to sprout, easy to plant. Don't do it. I say don't do it because a lot of times when somebody uh, when somebody wants to grow a wisteria, blooms are part of the reason that you would want to grow a wisteria. And if you plant those seeds, there are people who can get them to bloom, and there are people who can get them to bloom fairly quickly. And somebody will probably write in and say, I planted some wisteria seeds and got blooms, blah, blah, later. Awesome. That's not necessarily the norm. You can wait and wait and wait. You can wait decades until the thing decides it's old enough to start blooming. So, how do you get around that? It's easy. Take clones. Like this tree started as a as a clone. It literally, I didn't see this one, but I saw the other ones were literally sticks with hormone powder wrapped in wet paper, sent out the door. And you're instructed to plant them like that. And I did see one of them that that was out of its container to see if that's how it was done. And they probably weren't even rooted when they were sent. Uh, you know, they were when they got here. They were ready to go when they got here. But so if you want a wisteria that's going to bloom, get a clone from a blooming plant, not necessarily a seed from a blooming plant. That will not necessarily that will not get you a blooming wisteria plant for maybe years and years and years. Otherwise, they're not hard to grow from seed. If just you just want to grow one, that can be, that can be rewarding. If you're about the blooms, clone one. They're not hard to clone either, and it's really easy to uh, to go to your computer and type in wisteria, Japanese or Chinese, and say wisteria near me, and pull up an Etsy ad and take it from there. Pick your color, pick your country, and have it delivered. And a lot of times they will tell you, as a part of their ad, they will tell you that these are clones, cloned from cloned from blooming stock. And so and they could be lying to you, but a blooming wisteria is not so hard to find that why would somebody go to that much trouble just to lie to you about whether or not something's blooming or not? So I wouldn't be hyper skeptical about. I wouldn't kind of be hyper skeptical of. I would. I went on Etsy and trusted somebody that they told me their tree was blooming. I mean that these clones came from blooming stock, and I one time out, and I found that to be the case, and I would expect most of the time that your luck would be about the same. So then you've got, your little clone in a stick, but if you pick the right $4 pot, it can be a pretty stick in a pot. Also, other stuff I didn't know, and how some of that actually helped. This is the kind of root, this root and this root, when it first came out, I turned it that way. You can see I've got a good trunk line going here. I've got a really good trunk line going here and there. And that was almost something I cut off. When it started, that looked like that looked like two fat little potatoes. That is exactly the kind of thing that on most trees, when you know what you're doing and you repot something, that would be the first thing you would normally cut off. And on this one, I bet that made a loud crunchy noise. But after I broke the pot, I still hadn't really caught on that the way it looked then, it looked like, I'm like, that's a big huge root. We're gonna let that. And I would later come to realize that that looked exactly like the kind of thing that you would tend to cut off and remove. 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 people who had had a little bit of bonsai training would have looked at that as an unsightly root. And when I started breaking away the grass tonight, before I brought this tree over to the table, when I started kind of clearing it up to look at what we were looking at, I was going, "Oh, holy moly! That's now a very, very desirable. I think that's grown in to a desirable shape. We'll keep that exposed. We'll keep it fattening up. I should probably cut this wire here and let that continue. Now, here's the thing. When I got back into bonsai, we were at the beginning of COVID. I was decorating my apartment because I was stuck here, and it seemed like a great time to decorate my apartment. And instead of going whole hog and decorating the apartment, I ended up getting a little sidetracked over the bonsai, and we started doing more of that than we were doing any decorating before it was all said and done, as it should be. But Wisteria was a great starting point. And if you are watching this and you're new to bonsai, or maybe you're out there in the world and you typed in wisteria, because you have a wisteria, you live in an apartment and you end up with a wisteria plant, and you thought that was they're blooming and you thought those blooms were pretty. Maybe it's around Easter time, and you found yourself on the same aisle with the pretty wisteria, and now you're on the interweb trying to find out how you keep your wisteria alive. Well, people will tell you to watch out on the fertilizer, because if you go with fertilizers in not all fertilizers, most fertilizers, if you look at the packaging, there will be three numbers on the packaging at the front of it, usually somewhere, and those numbers will tell you uh, the amount of three different ingredients: potassium, nitrogen, sodium. I don't know. That might have been it, or I might have just been way off. I can never remember on command anything. But um, and the idea is different plants have different needs. So you might read that this one needs, and almost everybody, those three elements that are listed in there are in the same order every time. So uh, if you look at one fertilizer and it says 26 30, then that would tell you that it's, a lot of this ingredient, not a lot of this ingredient, and then a medium amount of the other, and you would know which one it is because they're always those in that same order. When it comes to some things you that bloom, high numbers on that packaging, those three numbers, high numbers can, I think it's nitrogen. A lot of nitrogen keeps them from blooming, causes them to bloom. I forget how that works. But here's what: the reason I forgot how that works is because I don't have to worry about it. This is biogold. It's fertilizer. It smells like mint because they spray it with mint so that animals won't steal it off your plants or eat it. Or, my own dog, if it hits the floor, it looks like dog treats, and she'll walk up and go, "Ugh." Animals don't like mint as much as we do, but it's fertilizer. And when it comes to those three numbers, they're all single digits. That makes it a really good fertilizer for bonsai because you can low dose your bonsai and keep them healthy, but you uh, have to worry a little less about them getting fed in such a way as to cause them to stretch out or grow real long and gangly in some way that you hadn't counted on, uh, which is what I was afraid of. And that would be a reason to not fertilize. That would be a reason to not feed something that would generally like to be fed. So for lack of knowing how to do it, sometimes people do it badly, I guess is what I'm saying. I did it badly. I also, instead of learning how to do it, I kept reading not to do it because of the blooming thing. But I have been feeding these guys around the calendar for about a little over 2 years now, and that's been with BioGold. And like I alluded to just a minute ago, the numbers on BioGold are like 555. They're all they're all low dose numbers. You are doing good things for your trees. You're getting good things in there, but you're not blowing anything out. You're hopefully not making a lot of salts and stuff. And I know that it increases, that the mycorrhiza increases when I started using it. I started seeing a lot more mycorrhiza in the soil after I started using that. So Uh, if you're worried about feeding these, you can definitely do it with BioGold and those numbers being 555. There's not a one of those numbers that'll keep your that should keep your wisteria from blooming. Now, what I was set up for was hanging out at the house during COVID, like a lot of us. But had I needed to hit the road, say I was in sales, or say I was a student, or say I was in a relationship where I would spend 2 or 3 days of the week at my place where I lived with my roommate, and maybe 2 or 3 days of the week at the other person's place where they lived, kind of, the way people tend to do. Well, I would make a lot of bonsai difficult. If you're not there at least part of the time full time, I mean like a little bit every at least a little bit every day, then you're going to have your losses. The exception to that would be a wisteria. If I wanted to blow town for a week, I could bring Frida with me. Uh, we like to eat out at the same places. But then when it comes to my bonsai trees, I had one. Say I had one or two. Then a pie tin with that much water in it, I could set this pot in that and I could hit the road. Hello there. Yeah, Frida. Hello there. Inform. Frida is she woke up when I said that, but yeah, she is sacked out. Also, Paul, quick note to you, sir, if you're still on. Find me on the Book of Faces. My presence is on there again. It won't be there like it used to be, but I did want to open a page so that I could contact people like you and like my other friend, and so that I could also hit things like the Facebook bonsai page for trees, pots, and seeds. I'm back on there. That's been as of 4 or 5 days. I already looked for you, but it didn't show you to me for some reason. Thought I'd let you know. All right, back to Wisteria. If you had a busy life, you could have a busy life and still have a wisteria for the reasons I just said. If I were to take a small dish or a pie tin and put the tree in water this deep, it definitely wouldn't dry out. It would take up the water that it needs to survive. And the whole time that I'm gone, it would still be okay. Now, a lot of people might hear that you can, like, and in the summer, when it's really hot, they tell you to do that if you want them to bloom. I don't really know what that's got to do with blooming. I just do that because I'm lazy and don't want to, and I know I can, so I don't have to worry about them getting dry midday like I do everything else. So, when I'm sure I'm not going to flood the thing, I have a pie tin that this pot sits in. Um, But some people think that that means that the roots can just sit there underwater and be fine. It's not exactly what's happening. It does help them bloom the next year, but they're not sitting there underneath the water with a snorkel surviving that. It's auto pruning. So when I set it in roots this far, that probably kills this layer of roots, but that doesn't kill the plant. Also, whenever it comes out of that and those dry out, the wisteria will shoot new roots into that, just like it's old straw or that old substratey looking stuff that they used to use for, build landscaping things out of. Anyway, it will shoot new roots into that and take off like there's no tomorrow. So in that way, you're kind of pruning back the roots, and they come back even stronger. Meanwhile, that's just above that water level still picks up water. Those that are submerged may die off. It doesn't care whether they die off. It'll just treat those old dead roots as substrate and just fill that right up. And in that way, it's sort of like if you lifted it out of the pot and cut the bottom layer off and stuck it back down there, you could expect a push of new growth. For the same reason, you could expect a push of new growth if you set it in the pan. But that also seems to hedge uh, for people who want to be able to spend some time away from their away from their home if they need to. You're in sales. You've got a long distance thing going. You're in and out quite a bit. Um, so that's one of the advantage. Another thing, I don't have this to worry about here because our temperatures in the Bay Area are nice enough. Indoor bonsai. There's really technically no such thing as an indoor tree, but I mean, nature never made trees with indoor in mind, but they're tropical. They can live indoors. A window, uh, put a dish of water underneath them, and then elevate the pot a little, and you can do that just for the humidity. And these would make a fine indoor bonsai, and they make a fine beginner bonsai. They're not hard to grow. They're not hard to keep alive. They're, like I said, you can water them and split and leave them in a vat of water, and they'll do fine. Uh, if you don't have a window, you could still, as long as you keep them over a vat of water so that they have the proper amount of humidity for inside the house. Now that's different than putting it in a vat of water like this. We're talking about inside the house is a whole new thing that causes a lot of problems for trees. Mostly what the inside of the house does to trees is it dries them out and causes them issues. And the way around that is to that same pie tin, and then put a square object in the middle of the pie tin so you can set the pot on the square object in the middle of the pie tin, and the pie tin has water in it, and then that water evaporates and keeps the tree from drying out, and also gives you a way to catch the water from where you water this tree every day. Kind of a twofold thing. So with a wisteria, a beginner can have a tree that they can get used to doing bonsai. They can also have a tree that will allow them to have the weekends off if they need it. And they also will have a tree that if they have a window, like a southern window that gets daylight, that they can put this in there and have an indoor bonsai. Uh, Not the easiest thing to ramify. Also, you have to remember it wants to be a vine. It would rather be a vine than a tree. It can be a tree, but it would rather be a vine than a tree. It would rather have this apical dominant portion up here going and let this just die. I mean, not really die because the roots are there, but you wouldn't see a lot of back button. You wouldn't see, a lot of times in the wild, you might see a big, thick root in the ground, And then there's this straw that takes up 10 or 15 feet to the next limb of a tree. And it shed any leaves it had until it climbed up the tree a long ways. It's like, why waste it until we get up there and spread out? And to that end, they will kill their host. If they're, if you have this thing taking over a tree, it'll climb all over it, get all the light, and start literally tearing that thing down, and then move on to another one. They don't even care about their own bases. Um, let's see, Japanese wisteria versus Chinese wisteria. Uh, Japanese wisteria is said to be the more fragrant of the two. Sure, that depends on the species, and I'm sure there's somebody somewhere that propagated a Chinese wisteria that would stink you out of the house. This thing has a very, very pleasant smell. It smells like it has a very pleasing smell. It also gives me hay fever really bad. I go like, whoa, but darn, it does. It smells good. And the Japanese wisterias tend to have longer cascades of blooms, a foot or more. It's not unusual to see like a foot long cascade of blooms. The Chinese wisteria has shorter clusters and they're not supposedly as fragrant, but they also have a lot of cool colors. And the colors you can see for either there's some blues, there's some purples, there's some whites, there's some pinks, and there's some variation on those. Um, Watching when I first my introduction to Heron's bonsai was looking at his wisteria videos. Whenever the first night when I typed in wisteria bonsai and got all those, he has an extensive amount of wisterias. He usually probably has a dozen or a half a dozen shows on wisterias alone. Spring comes, they all start blooming, and he grabs his camera and starts running through and starts doing a lot of wisteria lectures. One wisteria has completely taken over the back lot, and it started as a bonsai that he planted in the ground to fatten up and never got back to it. And now it's like huge. Um, Japanese, as he always likes to say, the Japanese wisteria spirals clockwise, and the Chinese wisteria, its tendrils wrap counterclockwise. I One way you would know. And I suppose you're supposed to look at that from the top down. If you were underneath it from the top up, you might see that. Uh, backwards. Anyway, that is that is our little cleanup tonight that we've done on our Japanese wisteria. This one little stick in a pot in a very cheap little bonsai pot has given me more hours of bonsai joy. And at times, I've almost forgotten about it since I've gone off onto pines, and I've gone off into cypress trees, and I've gone off into into the dawn redwoods and the maples, you know, all those other things, and all the while it all began with a little stick in a pot, and every mistake probably that a beginner could could possibly make. The first year I managed to overwater this. I wanted nothing but the good stuff, so I decided that um, some soil that retained a lot of moisture would be good, and so I turned the root ball into a big soupy white fly holiday, and also they bloom and set out all this stuff in about midsummer when all everything else shuts down for midsummer for a little while. These things die like they're done, and then in fall they start over again. Well, at that point, I'm looking at all of that, and I went, "You killed it. You watered your wisteria to death. The thing that can survive if you throw it in water, you watered it to death and killed it." So it wasn't that easy. I'm not that easy to kill, I suppose, and like me, it can take a licking and keep on ticking. So this is my beginning to bonsai, and everything we've done since there started right here. These are great trees to begin with. You will have to keep them cut back because they want to grow long. I am getting a lot of buds back here. It's still back budding, but that's because I keep chopping it back. And last year, I don't know how many blooms I may have cut off when I cut it back. But the way to do one of these is to let them run, let them grow, let them do all the stuff they want to do. And then in the fall, whenever all the leaves die on it, chop all that back to the original plant, maybe just plus a little, or or they'll start becoming a vine on you, and you won't have a bonsai tree. Uh, yeah. Like and subscribe if you guys haven't already. Our next show will be mañana. We'll go out on the balcony and we'll do something cool. I'm not really sure what, but we'll do something. Think maybe no, we're supposed to be in for some rain tomorrow. Let's see. They kind of been getting that wrong the last couple of days. But yeah, let's see how that works out. All my pine trees are budding out and making candles. I don't know if everybody else's is or if my lights are asking them to do that early. But it's not just my mom age, it's all the pines. All the pines on my balcony are making. I wonder when I walk the grounds. I haven't been noticing the trees on the grounds. I should probably see what they're doing. That'll tell me whether or not I'm early or not, because there are other big black pines around here. Um, yeah, in some places it's the weather's just but yeah, I appreciate you, and Frida appreciates you, and thank you so much for watching.